On the day the People's Republic of China was founded, its leaders made a sweeping promise. Every worker would have a job for life. And for decades, they kept it. Until one day, they didn't. The promise shattered. Entire cities stalled. And tens of millions of workers found themselves laid off brutally, without warning. How did a nation go from guaranteeing lifetime employment to suddenly abandoning its workers? Most stories of China's ascent begin with triumph. Ours begins with a debacle that somehow fueled that triumph. Let's dive into the buried chapter on the causes, the sacrifices, and the turning point that reshaped a superpower from within. When People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, its leaders decided to run their economy on Marxist doctrines. Now, why did they go with such radical ideas? To figure it out, we must travel back to the 19th century Karl Marx lived in. At that time, the Industrial Revolution had unleashed both astonishing progress and staggering cruelty. Factories ran on 16-hour shifts, child labor was everywhere, and workers had no rights, no protection, nothing but exhaustion and exploitation. Marx watched this brutality and concluded that capitalism was fundamentally evil, a system built on the suffering of workers. So he imagined a radical alternative: a world without private property, a society without classes, a paradise where workers owned everything together. His proposal was called Communism or Marxism, perfect on paper, intoxicating in theory. Russia tried it first in 1917 to establish the Soviet Union. Their revolution electrified activists around the world, including next door in China, a nation drowning in its own disasters. Early 20th century China was a mess. Warlords, civil war, corruption, famine, foreign invasions, the infamous century of humiliation. Into this despair stepped the Chinese Communist Party, founded in 1921 by idealists and students armed with Marxist pamphlets and Soviet guidance. They were not economists. They were believers, convinced Marxism would lead to prosperity, fairness, and equality. And in 1949, when the CCP finally took power, they embraced Marxism completely. Factories, farms, mines were all nationalized as state-owned enterprises, or SOEs in short. Workers were promised lifetime jobs, housing, and health care. Central government planned everything, down to how many nails to make. It's a worker's paradise, on paper. But paper doesn't push back. Reality does. And soon, cracks began to emerge. The grand socialist blueprint looked flawless from afar. Up close, it didn't deliver as expected. First off, central planners lacked economic expertise to know what to produce and how much. Many of them never ran a business. Their poor decisions often led to massive inefficiencies. Factories turned out products no one wanted, while shortages plagued everyday life. That would not lead to prosperity. Then there's the incentive problem. Everyone receives equal payment regardless of their output, so why work hard? It's indeed unfair to the more productive workers. State-owned firms became bloated with overemployment, hiring way more workers than needed to keep unemployment low and maintain social harmony. Private initiative was not just discouraged, it was criminalized. A farmer household was allowed to keep up to 3 chickens. Owning more was considered running a private business, a violation of socialist principles. Extra chickens would be confiscated. The household would be fined. It sounds trivial, but it was symbolic. Daily entrepreneurship, the heartbeat of any prosperous society, became an offense against the state.
The system was so rigid, so suspicious of individual effort, that even basic economic logic was treated as ideological disobedience. Despite the promise of prosperity, fairness, and equality, Marxists delivered almost exactly the opposite, making everyone equally poor. By the late 1970s, the problems were glaring. China's GDP per capita was around $200, South Korea's was about $1,500, and Japan, $9,000. These market-leaning neighbors embraced capitalism, innovation, and trade, leaving China in the dust, mired in poverty and inefficiency. Someone had to change course. The country needed a pragmatic leader willing to break from dogma and confront reality. And in 1978, one emerged.
Enter Deng Xiaoping. Deng was no ideologue. He had lived through the extremes of the system and understood a painful truth. If China stuck to rigid Marxist doctrine, it would never escape poverty. But Deng also knew that openly rejecting Marxism would risk political chaos. So he termed his reform policies as Chinese brand of socialism, a phrase vague enough to preserve ideological appearances, yet flexible enough to quietly smuggle in capitalism. The early reforms were modest but transformative. In the countryside, farmers could finally sell surplus crops for profit. Overnight, incomes soared, often outpacing what whole communes had earned in years. Incentives, it turned out, actually worked. Along the coast, Deng established the now famous special economic zones, such as Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and so on. Over there, market forces were allowed to operate freely. Foreign companies were welcomed with tax breaks, local officials were encouraged to innovate. Private businesses quietly emerged after decades of prohibition. It was controlled chaos. Capitalism contained within socialist walls. But it worked. Factories sprang up overnight, ports buzzed with trade. By the mid-1980s, China's growth rates exploded into double digits. China began exporting anything and everything the world demanded. For ordinary people, the shift was electrifying. Suddenly, effort mattered. Success wasn't assigned by the state, but earned in the marketplace. The ability to rise or fall on one's own became its own quiet revolution.
And beneath this economic awakening, Deng was quietly preparing for something even more drastic. The state-owned enterprises, the old pillars of the Marxist system, were bloated, inefficient, and dependent on endless subsidies. They couldn't survive in a competitive market. Sooner or later, they would have to be dismantled. But Deng had to time it right. You don't demolish a building while people are still living inside. First, you build the alternatives, such as private businesses and special economic zones, and only then can you pull it. That demolition would come in the 1990s, and it would shake China to its core.
By the early 1990s, China's state-owned enterprises were crumbling. These SOEs, once the pride of socialist industry, now devoured billions in subsidies and produced little value. The new economy could not grow while the old one continued draining its lifeblood. So in 1995, Beijing decided to keep only a handful of strategic SOE giants in banking, energy, transport, heavy industry sectors, and restructure, merge, or shut down the rest. It was economic surgery on a living nation, painful, rapid, inevitable. From 1995 to 2001, China launched one of the largest labor upheavals in history. More than 50 million workers lost their SOE jobs. Factory towns emptied, apartments went dark, whole industrial districts became ghostly shells of their former selves. And the shock spread far wider. Each worker, on average, supported 2 family members, so over 150 million people felt the impact. What made it harsher was inadequate unemployment support. Modern economies cushion layoffs with severance, retraining, and unemployment insurance. 1990s China had little of that. Most laid-off workers received nothing, just a blunt message: the state will no longer take care of you. The promise of lifetime job security had become a nightmare. For many, it was a deep sense of betrayal. The party born to protect workers was now discarding them with a ruthlessness that would shock a corporate downsizer. The fear and anger of those years still linger. The reform was necessary, maybe unavoidable, but its human cost was enormous. But the story didn't end in despair. History was about to deliver one more unexpected twist, one that would bring relief.
The reforms had unleashed the market, but the market wasn't yet big enough to absorb tens of millions of newly unemployed. Private firms were young, domestic demand weak, and even booming coastal cities couldn't hire fast enough. Then came an extraordinary turn. In 2001, after years of negotiation, China joined the World Trade Organization, and the global economy swung open its doors. Foreign companies saw in China a vast labor pool, a government hungry for investment, few labor or environmental constraints, and wages far below global norms. It's a golden opportunity. So capital poured in. Factories from Taiwan, Japan, Korea, the US, and Europe sprouted overnight. Manufacturing assembly lines multiplied at breathtaking speed. And the very workers discarded by the old Marxist system suddenly found themselves in demand, not by the state, but by global capital. The irony was sharp. A communist government that vowed to shield workers from greedy capitalists had laid them off by the millions. And those same capitalists returned to hire them. Foreign employers, driven purely by profit, provided jobs, wages, and a path forward, something the state could not. It didn't save everyone. Many never found steady work again, and the human cost of the 1990s layoffs remains one of the least acknowledged parts of China's rise. But for millions who endured, the WTO boom was a lifeline, the spark that launched a new era. By the early 2000s, China's GDP was soaring, investments surging, ports expanding, and cities erupting with construction. China was on its way to becoming the factory of the world. Beneath the miracle, though, was a generation whose sacrifices rarely appear in the statistics, the silent foundation of China's modern prosperity. Looking back at China's long detour through the Marxist experiment, it's clear that things didn't always unfold as intended. Karl Marx was trying to fix the ugliness of early capitalism, but his blueprint was raw, emotional, and untested. China jumped into Marxist economic models with both feet, when, in hindsight, a small-scale trial might have been wiser. The world isn't black and white, and neither are economic systems. Real solutions usually live in the gray, in blends and hybrids. China eventually discovered this the hard way. Now its modern economy is a mix of central planning and private business, and that balance has become its strength. China's rise was neither clean nor painless. Success often belongs to not those who get it right from the outset, but those willing to adapt from their failures. Thanks for staying with me on this journey. And if you're interested in more incredible stories, you know what to do.